Book 6, Chapter 3 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 3. Next morning, having taken leave of no one but the Count, and not waiting for the ladies to appear, Prince Andrew set off for home. It was already the beginning of June when on his return journey he drove into the birch forest where the gnarled old oak had made so strange and memorable an impression on him. In the forest the harness bells sounded yet more muffled than they had 6 weeks before, for now all was thick, shady, and dense, and the young firs dotted about in the forest did not jar on the general beauty, but, lending themselves to the mood around, were delicately green with fluffy young shoots. The whole day had been hot. Somewhere a storm was gathering, but only a small cloud had scattered some raindrops lightly, sprinkling the road and sappy leaves. The left side of the forest was dark in the shade, the right side glittered in the sunlight, wet and shiny and scarcely swayed by the breeze. Everything was in blossom. The nightingales trilled, and their voices reverberated, now near, now far away. Yes, here in this forest was that oak with which I agreed, thought Prince Andrew. But where is it? He again wondered, gazing at the left side of the road, and without recognizing it, he looked with admiration at the very oak he sought. The old oak, quite transfigured, spreading out a canopy of sappy dark green foliage, stood wrapped and slightly trembling in the rays of the evening sun. Neither gnarled fingers, nor old scars, nor old doubts and sorrows were any of them in evidence now. Through the hard century-old bark, even where there were no twigs, leaves had sprouted, such as one could hardly believe the old veteran could have produced. Yes, it is the same oak, thought Prince Andrew, and all at once he was seized by an unreasoning springtime feeling of joy and renewal. All the best moments of his life suddenly rose to his memory. Austerlitz, with the lofty heavens, his wife's dead, reproachful face, Pierre at the ferry, that girl thrilled by the beauty of the night, and that night itself and the moon, and all this rushed suddenly to his mind. No, life is not over at 31, Prince Andrew suddenly decided finally and decisively. It is not enough for me to know what I have in me. Everyone must know it. Pierre, and that young girl who wanted to fly away into the sky, everyone must know me, so that my life may not be lived for myself alone, while others live so apart from it, but so that it may be reflected in them all, and they and I may live in harmony. On reaching home, Prince Andrew decided to go to Petersburg that autumn, and found all sorts of reasons for this decision. A whole series of sensible and logical considerations showing it to be essential for him to go to Petersburg, and even to re-enter the service, kept springing up in his mind. He could not now understand how he could ever even have doubted the necessity of taking an active share in life, just as a month before he had not understood how the idea of leaving the quiet country could ever enter his head. It now seemed clear to him that all his experience of life must be senselessly wasted unless he applied it to some kind of work, and again played an active part in life. He did not even remember how formerly, on the strength of similar wretched logical arguments, it had seemed obvious that he would be degrading himself if he now, after the lessons he had had in life, allowed himself to believe in the possibility of being useful and in the possibility of happiness or love. Now reason suggested quite the opposite. After that journey to Ryazan, he found the country dull. His former pursuits no longer interested him, and often, when sitting alone in his study, he got up, went to the mirror, and gazed a long time at his own face. Then he would turn away to the portrait of his dead Lisa, who, with hair curled à la grecque, looked tenderly and gaily at him out of the gilt frame. She did not now say those former terrible words to him, but looked simply, merrily, and inquisitively at him. And Prince Andrew, crossing his arms behind him, long paced the room, now frowning, now smiling, as he reflected on those irrational, inexpressible thoughts, secret as a crime, which altered his whole life and were connected with Pierre, with fame, with the girl at the window, the oak, the woman's beauty and love. And if anyone came into his room at such moments, he was particularly cold, stern, and above all, unpleasantly logical. "My dear," Princess Mary, entering at such a moment, would say, "little Nicholas can't go out today. It's very cold." "If it were hot," Prince Andrew would reply at such times very dryly to his sister, "he could go out in his smock, but as it is cold, he must wear warm clothes, which were designed for that purpose. That is what follows from the fact that it is cold, and not that a child who needs fresh air should remain at home," he would add with extreme logic, as if punishing someone for those secret, illogical emotions that stirred within him. At such moments Prince Mary would think how intellectual work dries men up. End of Book 6, Chapter 3. Book 6, Chapter 4, Of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 4. Prince Andrew arrived in Petersburg in August 1809. It was the time when the youthful Speransky was at the zenith of his fame, and his reforms were being pushed forward with the greatest energy. That same August, the Emperor was thrown from his calèche, injured his leg, and remained 3 weeks at Peterhof, receiving Speransky every day and no one else. At that time the two famous decrees were being prepared that so agitated society: abolishing court ranks and introducing examinations to qualify for the grades of collegiate assessor and state councillor, and not merely these, but a whole state constitution, intended to change the existing order of government in Russia, legal, administrative, and financial, from the Council of State down to the district tribunals. Now, those vague liberal dreams with which the Emperor Alexander had ascended the throne, and which he had tried to put into effect with the aid of his associates Czartoryski, Novosiltsev, Kobuchay, and Stroganov, whom he himself in jest had called his Comité de Salut Public, were taking shape and being realized. Now all these men were replaced by Speransky on the civil side and Arakcheyev on the military. Soon after his arrival, Prince Andrew, as a gentleman of the chamber, presented himself at court and at a levee. The Emperor, though he met him twice, did not favor him with a single word. It had always seemed to Prince Andrew before that he was antipathetic to the Emperor, and that the latter disliked his face and personality generally, and in the cold, repellent glance the Emperor gave him, he now found further confirmation of this surmise. The courtiers explained the Emperor's neglect of him by His Majesty's displeasure at Bolkonsky's not having served since 1805. "I know myself that one cannot help one's sympathies and antipathies," thought Prince Andrew. "So it will not do to present my proposal for the reform of the army regulations to the Emperor personally, but the project will speak for itself." He mentioned what he had written to an old field marshal, a friend of his father's. The field marshal made an appointment to see him, received him graciously, and promised to inform the Emperor. A few days later, Prince Andrew received notice that he was to go to see the Minister of War, Count Arakcheyev. On the appointed day, Prince Andrew entered Count Arakcheyev's waiting room at 9 in the morning. He did not know Arakcheyev personally, had never seen him, and all he had heard of him inspired him with but little respect for the man. "He is Minister of War, a man trusted by the Emperor, and I need not concern myself about his personal qualities. He has been commissioned to consider my project, so he alone can get it adopted," thought Prince Andrew as he waited among a number of important and unimportant people in Count Arakcheyev's waiting room. During his service, chiefly as adjutant, Prince Andrew had seen the anterooms of many important men, and the different types of such rooms were well known to him. Count Arakcheyev's anteroom had quite a special character. The faces of the unimportant people awaiting their turn for an audience showed embarrassment and servility. The faces of those of higher rank expressed a common feeling of awkwardness, covered by a mask of unconcern and ridicule of themselves, their situation, and the person for whom they were waiting. Some walked thoughtfully up and down, others whispered and laughed, Prince Andrew heard the nickname Sila Andreevich and the words, "Uncle will give it to us hot," in reference to Count Arakcheyev. One general, an important personage, evidently feeling offended at having to wait so long, sat crossing and uncrossing his legs and smiling contemptuously to himself. But the moment the door opened, one feeling alone appeared on all faces, that of fear. Prince Andrew for the second time asked the adjutant on duty to take in his name, but received an ironical look and was told that his turn would come in due course. After some others had been shown in and out of the minister's room by the adjutant on duty, an officer who struck Prince Andrew by his humiliated and frightened air was admitted at that terrible door. This officer's audience lasted a long time. Then suddenly the grating sound of a harsh voice was heard from the other side of the door, and the officer, with pale face and trembling lips, came out and passed through the waiting-room, clutching his head. After this, Prince Andrew was conducted to the door, and the officer on duty said in a whisper, "To the right, at the window." Prince Andrew entered a plain, tidy room, and saw at the table a man of 40, with a long waist, a long, closely cropped head, deep wrinkles, scowling brows above dull, greenish-hazel eyes, and an overhanging red nose. Arakcheyev turned his head toward him without looking at him. "What is your petition?" asked Arakcheyev. "I am not petitioning, Your Excellency," returned Prince Andrew quietly. Arakcheyev's eyes turned toward him. "Sit down," said he. "Prince Bolkonsky?" "I am not petitioning about anything. His Majesty the Emperor has deigned to send Your Excellency a project submitted by me." "You see, my dear sir, I have read your project," interrupted Arakcheyev, uttering only the first words amiably, and then, again without looking at Prince Andrew, relapsing gradually into a tone of grumbling contempt. "You are proposing new military laws? There are many laws, but no one to carry out the old ones. Nowadays everybody designs laws. It is easier writing than doing." "I came at His Majesty the Emperor's wish to learn from Your Excellency how you propose to deal with the memorandum I have presented," said Prince Andrew politely. "I have endorsed a resolution on your memorandum and sent it to the committee. I do not approve of it," said Arakcheyev, rising and taking a paper from his writing table. "Here," and he handed it to Prince Andrew. Across the paper was scrawled in pencil, without capital letters, misspelled and without punctuation, "Unsoundly constructed because resembles an imitation of the French military code, and from the Articles of War needlessly deviating." "To what committee has the memorandum been referred?" inquired Prince Andrew. "To the Committee on Army Regulations, and I have recommended that Your Honor should be appointed a member, but without a salary." Prince Andrew smiled. "I don't want one." "A member without salary," repeated Arakcheyev. "I have the honor— call the next one. Who else is there?" he shouted, bowing to Prince Andrew. End of Book 6, Chapter 4. Book 6, Chapter 5 of War and Peace, Volume 2, by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Elmer Maude. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 6, Chapter 5. While waiting for the announcement of his appointment to the committee, Prince Andrew looked up his former acquaintances, particularly those he knew to be in power and whose aid he might need. In Petersburg, he now experienced the same feeling he had had on the eve of a battle, when troubled by anxious curiosity and irresistibly attracted to the ruling circles where the future, on which the fate of millions depended, was being shaped. From the irritation of the older men, the curiosity of the uninitiated, the reserve of the initiated, the hurry and preoccupation of everyone, and the innumerable committees and commissions of whose existence he learned every day, he felt that now, in 1809, here in Petersburg, a vast civil conflict was in preparation, the commander-in-chief of which was a mysterious person he did not know, but who was supposed to be a man of genius, Speransky. And this movement of reconstruction of which Prince Andrew had a vague idea, and Speransky, its chief promoter, began to interest him so keenly that the question of the Army regulations quickly receded to a secondary place in his consciousness. Prince Andrew was most favorably placed to secure a good reception in the highest and most diverse Petersburg circles of the day. The reforming party cordially welcomed and courted him, in the first place because he was reputed to be clever and very well read, and secondly because by liberating his serfs he had obtained the reputation of being a liberal. The party of the old and dissatisfied, who censured the innovations, turned to him expecting his sympathy in their disapproval of the reforms, simply because he was the son of his father. The feminine society world welcomed him gladly, because he was rich, distinguished, a good match, and almost a newcomer, with a halo of romance on account of his supposed death and the tragic loss of his wife. Besides this, the general opinion of all who had known him previously was that he had greatly improved during these last 5 years, having softened and grown more manly, lost his former affectation, pride, and contemptuous irony, and acquired the serenity that comes with years. People talked about him, were interested in him, and wanted to meet him. The day after his interview with Count Arakcheyev, Prince Andrew spent the evening at Count Kochubey's. He told the Count of his interview with Sila Andreevich. Kochubey spoke of Arakcheyev by that nickname with the same vague irony Prince Andrew had noticed in the Minister of War's anteroom. "Mon cher, even in this case you can't do without Michael Mikhailovich Speransky. He manages everything. I'll speak to him. He has promised to come this evening." "What has Speransky to do with the Army regulations?" asked Prince Andrew. Kochubey shook his head smilingly, as if surprised at Bolkonsky's simplicity. "We were talking to him about you a few days ago," Kochubey continued, "and about your freed ploughmen." "Oh, is it you, Prince, who have freed your serfs?" said an old man of Catherine's day, turning contemptuously toward Bolkonsky. "It was a small estate that brought in no profit," replied Prince Andrew, trying to extenuate his action so as to not irritate the old man uselessly. "Afraid of being late," said the old man, looking at Kochubey. "There's one thing I don't understand," he continued. "Who will plough the land if they are set free? It is easy to write laws, but difficult to rule. Just the same as now, I ask you, Count, who will be the heads of the departments when everybody has to pass examinations?" "Those who pass the examinations, I suppose," replied Kochubey, crossing his legs and glancing round. "Well, I have Pryanitchnikov serving under me, a splendid man, a priceless man, but he's 60. Is he to go up for examination?" "Yes, that's a difficulty, as education is not at all general, but—" Count Kochubey did not finish. He rose, took Prince Andrew by the arm, and went to meet a tall, bald, fair man of about 40, with a large open forehead and a long face of unusual and peculiar whiteness, who was just entering. The newcomer wore a blue swallow-tail coat with a cross suspended from his neck and a star on his left breast. It was Speransky. Prince Andrew recognized him at once, and felt a throb within him, as happens at critical moments of life. Whether it was from respect, envy, or anticipation, he did not know. Speransky's whole figure was of a peculiar type that made him easily recognizable. In the society in which Prince Andrew lived, he had never seen anyone who, together with awkward and clumsy gestures, possessed such calmness and self-assurance. He had never seen so resolute yet gentle an expression as that in those half-closed, rather humid eyes, or so firm a smile that expressed nothing. Nor had he heard such a refined, smooth, soft voice. Above all, he had never seen such delicate whiteness of face or hands which were broad but very plump, soft, and white. Such whiteness and softness Prince Andrew had only seen on the faces of soldiers who had been long in hospital. This was Speransky, Secretary of State, reporter to the Emperor, and his companion at Erfurt, where he had more than once met and talked with Napoleon. Speransky did not shift his eyes from one face to another, as people involuntarily do on entering a large company, and was in no hurry to speak. He spoke slowly, with assurance that he would be listened to, and he looked only at the person with whom he was conversing. Prince Andrew followed Speransky's every word and movement with particular attention. As happens to some people, especially to men who judge those near to them severely, he always, on meeting anyone new, especially anyone whom, like Speransky, he knew by reputation, expected to discover in him the perfection of human qualities. Speransky told Kochubey he was sorry he had been unable to come sooner, as he had been detained at the palace. He did not say that the Emperor had kept him, and Prince Andrew noticed this affectation of modesty. When Kochubey introduced Prince Andrew, Speransky slowly turned his eyes to Bolkonsky with his customary smile and looked at him in silence. "I am very glad to make your acquaintance. I had heard of you, as everyone has," he said after a pause. Kochubey said a few words about the reception Arakcheyev had given Bolkonsky. Speransky smiled more markedly. "The chairman of the Committee on Army Regulations is my good friend Monsieur Magnitsky," he said, fully articulating every word and syllable. "And if you like, I can put you in touch with him." He paused at the full stop. "I hope you will find him sympathetic and ready to cooperate in promoting all that is reasonable." A circle soon formed round Speransky, and the old man who had talked about his subordinate Pryanichnikov addressed a question to him. Prince Andrew, without joining in the conversation, watched every movement of Speransky's. This man, not long since an insignificant divinity student, who now Bolkonsky thought held in his hands, those plump white hands, the fate of Russia. Prince Andrew was struck by the extraordinarily disdainful composure with which Speransky answered the old man. He appeared to address condescending words to him from an immeasurable height. When the old man began to speak too loud, Speransky smiled and said he could not judge of the advantage or disadvantage of what pleased the sovereign. Having talked for a little while in the general circle, Speransky rose and, coming up to Prince Andrew, took him along to the other end of the room. It was clear that he thought it necessary to interest himself in Bolkonsky. "I had no chance to talk with you, Prince, during the animated conversation in which that venerable gentleman involved me," he said with a mildly contemptuous smile, as if intimating by that smile that he and Prince Andrew understood the insignificance of the people with whom he had just been talking. This flattered Prince Andrew. "I have known of you for a long time, first from your action with regard to your serfs, a first example of which it is very desirable that there should be more imitators, and secondly because you are one of those gentlemen of the chamber who have not considered themselves offended by the new decree concerning the ranks allotted to courtiers, which is causing so much gossip and tittle-tattle." "No," said Prince Andrew. "My father did not wish me to take advantage of the privilege. I began the service from the lower grade." "Your father, a man of the last century, evidently stands above our contemporaries who so condemn this measure which merely re-establishes natural justice." "I think, however, that these condemnations have some ground," returned Prince Andrew, trying to resist Speransky's influence, of which he began to be conscious. He did not like to agree with him in everything, and felt a wish to contradict. Though he usually spoke easily and well, he felt a difficulty in expressing himself now while talking with Speransky. He was too much absorbed in observing the famous man's personality. "Grounds of personal ambition, maybe," Speransky put in quietly. "And of state interest to some extent," said Prince Andrew. "What do you mean?" asked Speransky quietly, lowering his eyes. "I am an admirer of Montesquieu," replied Prince Andrew, "and his idea that le principe des monarchies et l'honneur me paraît incontestable. Certains droits et privilèges de la noblesse me paraissent être des moyens de soutenir ce sentiment." "The principle of monarchies is honor seems to me incontestable. Certain rights and privileges for the aristocracy appear to me a means of maintaining that sentiment." The smile vanished from Speransky's white face, which was much improved by the change. Probably Prince Andrew's thought interested him. "Si vous envisagez la question sous ce point de vue," If you regard the question from that point of view, he began, pronouncing French with evident difficulty, and speaking even slower than in Russian, but quite calmly. Speransky went on to say that honor, l'honneur, cannot be upheld by privileges harmful to the service. That honor, l'honneur, is either a negative concept of not doing what is blameworthy, or it is a source of emulation in pursuit of condemnation and rewards, which recognize it. His arguments were concise, simple, and clear. An institution upholding honor, the source of emulation, is one similar to the Légion d'honneur of the great Emperor Napoleon, not harmful but helpful to the success of the service, but not a class or court privilege. I do not dispute that, but it cannot be denied that court privileges have attained the same end, returned Prince Andrew. Every courtier considers himself bound to maintain his position worthily. Yet you do not care to avail yourself of the privilege, Prince, said Speransky, indicating by a smile that he wished to finish amiably an argument which was embarrassing for his companion. If you will do me the honor of calling on me on Wednesday, he added, I will, after talking with Magnitsky, let you know what may interest you, and shall also have the pleasure of a more detailed chat with you. Closing his eyes, he bowed à la Francais without taking leave, and trying to attract as little attention as possible, he left the room. End of Book 6, Chapter 5.